Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SSC-ADM webinar presented by the Simons Foundation and the Interactive Autism Network. My name is Casey White, and I'm the project manager for the Simons Simplex collection at the Simons Foundation. We're so glad that you could join us today, and we thank you for taking the time to participate in the EN community. Before we begin, I'd like to just say a couple of words about how today's webinar will work, just in case you've never attended an online meeting before. Today's presentation will be shown in a window on your computer screen, and the sound will come through your computer speakers. We are recording this webinar. We will post it on the EN website in about a week, so it can be viewed at a later date or sent to others who may be interested. Please be aware that in order to minimize disruptions, all audio except the presenters will be muted for the duration of the webinar. So if you speak, we will not be able to hear you. However, you can use the chat box at the bottom left of your screen to ask questions. These can be either technical in nature or for the presenter, and only the leaders of the webinar will be able to read them. At the end of the webinar, we will have a few minutes for a question and answer session, and we'll take these questions directly from your questions in the chat, or you can send them in via email to the email address in the invitation that you received about this webinar. Please note that the speaker is not able to provide advice regarding your child specifically, but he's happy to answer other topical questions about his presentation today. So I think that's all the webinar information I have for you. So let me just take a moment to introduce today's speaker. I'm pleased today to welcome Dr. Paul Shattuck to the SSC-ADM webinar. Dr. Shattuck is an associate professor at Drexel University's A.J. Drexel Autism Institute. There he is the director of the Life Course Outcomes program. The focus of his research is on policies and services for people with autism and their families. As part of our SSC-ADM webinar series, we try to highlight topics that the community of families has told us are important to them. The transition to adulthood and related outcomes are issues that come up very frequently. Our success in addressing the community's interest really depends on scientists like Dr. Shattuck giving their time to talk to families about their research, so we truly appreciate him joining us today. Dr. Shattuck is going to give us an overview today of the A.J. Drexel Autism Institute's Life Course Outcomes Research Program, and this includes the National Autism Data Center, the National Autism Indicators Report Series, and the Transition Pathways Initiative. So at this time, I'd like to go ahead and turn the webinar over to Dr. Shattuck, and just thank you so much again for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Many thanks to the Simons Foundation and the Interactive Autism Network for creating this forum and for the invitation to speak today. I'm very thrilled to be with you all today. And it's my pleasure to talk about the work that we're doing here at the A.J. Drexel Autism Institute in my Life Course Outcomes research program. So let me get started. So what we do here in my research program is we take a somewhat different approach than many other programs in the world of autism research. I come to this work with a background in sociology and public health and social work. So I do not have a background doing therapy or direct intervention or clinical work with people on the autism spectrum. Most of my prior professional background before going to graduate school in my late 30s was around community organizing and building community-based programs to serve very low-income families, homeless populations, migrant farm workers, and so forth. So I come to this work with a lens, if you will, a perspective of trying to focus on programs, organizations, communities, and systems and policies. So a lot of the work that we do is aimed at things other than clinical interventions that influence how life turns out. We use this life course framework, which is it's a conceptual framework used a lot in sociology and public health. And let me just take a minute to illustrate what we mean when we use that phrase life course. So what is the life course? So let's imagine that there's a young man named Miguel. And let's say Miguel has been in high school for 5 or 6 years. He's on the autism spectrum. And it's graduation week, so it's his last week of high school, and he's getting ready to graduate. During the past 5 or 6 years in high school, Miguel has been receiving speech therapy, mental health counseling. He's been getting some vocational training and preparation and doing an internship in his local community with support from the special ed teacher. And he's generally been going to school and getting sort of one-stop shopping through special ed since he was identified on the spectrum at age 4 and entered an early childhood special ed preschool classroom at that time. So really, most of his life, he's been getting special services through the school district. Now, a couple days later, he walks across that stage, he collects his diploma, and a few days later, he is no longer in high school. So over the course of a week, he's gone from being a high school student who is eligible for special ed services to being a post-high school person who's no longer a student, who's no longer eligible for special ed services that he's been getting since early childhood. So arguably, Miguel has not changed a lot in the matter of a few days in terms of his learning achievement or in terms of his cognitive ability or his language ability. His social skills have not dramatically changed in a few days, but his relationship to society and his relationship to his community has changed dramatically. He is forever in a different category in terms of the kinds of services he is or is not eligible for. He has different expectations on him now as a young man who's no longer a high school student, expectations with regard to work, post-secondary education, moving towards independent living. Really, his relationship to the people and the social institutions around him are forever different. So in this life course framework, we focus less on modifying or thinking about individual skills and abilities of the person on the spectrum. We focus a lot more on how people are partially defined by their social roles and the linkages they have to institutions and the communities around them. So for anybody who's my age or older, you may remember the game of life, and that's just kind of an image we use to illustrate some of these ideas when we're talking about them. So today's talk, I want to talk mainly about two things: our National Autism Data Center and the Transition Pathways Initiative that we've launched here at Drexel University. So why a data center? So I'll tell you in a moment what our data center is all about. But basically, the general concept began with the realization that we spend billions of dollars on services and on research on autism, but we have very little in the way of population-level data on what this population needs or what the impacts are of all that money that's being spent on services. So it would be a little bit like if somebody asked you to run a multi-billion-dollar corporation, but there were no balance sheets. There were no indicators at the organizational level to tell you how much money was being spent on exactly what and with what impact. In the world of policy and policy research and policy advocacy, there's an old saying that says a needy population doesn't count until someone counts it. So a lot of what we do in our program is literally counting, how many people get different kinds of services, what kinds of services do people need, what's the gap between the kind of help people need versus the help people get, and what do the outcomes look like? How many people get a job? How many people go to college? We take the phrase, are we moving the needle, quite literally. We need gauges to know whether we're moving the needle, and we try to not think about that as a metaphoric exercise, but as a literal thing that we can measure. Is the unemployment rate going up or down? We should be able to know that. So we're trying to build a program of research that will let us answer those kinds of questions. The overall concept is we do very little in the way of what's called original or primary data collection, whereas many autism research centers and programs focus on extensively going out and interviewing families and doing clinical assessments of people with autism. Much of our work here at the Life Course Outcomes program revolves around using data that's already been gathered by others, whether it's in the course of administering a large-scale public program like SSI or VR, or sometimes national health surveys include a number of people on the autism spectrum as participants in the national survey. We gather all those data sets together and work on reports and fact sheets and analyses to try to understand, using existing data, as much as we can about this population. Really, we have a website that you can check out. If you Google Drexel Life Course Outcomes, you'll come right to our website, and we have a ton of fact sheets and infographics and so forth. But really, our big flagship product that we do once a year is called our National Autism Indicators Report, where it's an annual production cycle on this report. We've done two so far, one in 2015, one in 2016. Our third one is forthcoming in a few more weeks, and I'll talk about that in a little while. Every time we begin one of these flagship indicators reports, we start by thinking about the topic that we'll be covering and the kinds of questions we want to answer. And then we form a steering committee that involves autistic adults, family members, advocates, topical experts, researchers who help advise us through the process of creating the report, asking good questions. We place a tremendous emphasis on the usability of our reports and our information products. We do extensive sort of field testing, pilot testing, and also interviews and information gathering from legislators, legislative aides, directors of nonprofit agencies and state agencies. We ultimately want these reports to be used by people who are in a position of power to make decisions about policy and services. So we worked very hard at making these products useful to that end user audience by interacting extensively with those people and constantly seeking feedback from them on how we can do better. So what's an indicator? Let me give you when we talk about indicators, reports, and so on, what are we talking about? If any of you have ever driven a car, you're familiar with the concept of an indicator. An indicator in the context of driving a car is your dashboard. You have a bunch of gauges and dials that give you different information. They give you feedback as you drive. The speedometer tells you how fast you're going. The odometer tells you how many miles you've gone. Your nav system might tell you how far you've come and whether you're getting close to your destination, whether you're on track or not. In the world of policy and public health, we use indicators all the time. We have the national unemployment rate. Corporations have their balance sheets. Organizations, countries, states, government agencies use indicators all the time in a dashboard-like context to tell them who they're reaching, how much money they're spending, with what impact, and so forth. So in the world of autism research, we have a very strong tradition in this field of doing very intensive, detailed clinical research, neuroscience, and genetics research. Up until a couple of years ago, when we began our indicators research, really the world in autism, this is kind of what our indicators research field looked like. We didn't have a lot. It wasn't much of a dashboard at all at the population level to tell us things like who's getting a job, what do people need, what do people get, what's the gap there. So that's kind of the gap that we jumped into to try to fill. Our first National Indicators report came out in 2015 and focused on the theme of the transition to adulthood. We drew information from a couple of national surveys. There was a national survey of teens who at the beginning of the survey were enrolled in high school special education services. This national survey then followed that group for almost 10 years and gathered information along the way right up into their mid-20s about how life was turning out after high school. We also had information from a national health survey that included a sample of adolescents on the autism spectrum. And we tried to compile all this data into a very user-friendly report that had specific information that would be useful for legislators and decision makers and agency leaders. We've been really fortunate. We have had great success in generating impact on policy and practice using these indicators reports. With our first report in 2015, we ended up having many meetings with state and national legislators. I did a briefing with the Congressional Autism Caucus. We consulted on the production of a GAO report. We've had tremendous media coverage with national media, including NPR and USA Today and so forth, to try to raise awareness about the issues. Many people sort of mistakenly think that autism is only a childhood condition, and a lot of people in the general public who don't know much about autism really don't know much about the challenges facing transition-age youth, young adults, and older adults. So part of what we do with our indicators reports is we extensively court contact with national media to try to build awareness about the challenges facing people on the spectrum across the lifespan. We do a lot on social media. We have a Facebook page for our Life Course Outcomes program. You should go visit it and like us if you haven't already. We've got over 10,000 followers, and we actively promote our work on that venue as well. But we also we have an abiding commitment to doing rigorous work. So we preserve our credibility by making sure that every piece of information we put out there is meeting the highest scientific standards, and that's recognized by the IAC, which nominated this 2015 report as one of the most influential 20 studies of 2015 in the field of autism. So just to give you a little taste of the kinds of questions that we looked at in that first report, which again is available online. You can download it or browse it online for free. One set of questions revolves around understanding the characteristics of young people at the time of transition. And I'm going to plow through these slides pretty quickly because, again, this whole report is online and less about the statistical details here than I'm just trying to build awareness about the kind of work that we do so that you all can benefit from it and share it with people you know. We had information on the characteristics of teens with autism. And this, again, the distinguishing feature of a lot of the data that we use in this instance, this report was based on nationally representative data. So this was not, a small sample of 50 people from the local school district. This was based on a nationally representative sample of young people on the autism spectrum. And it was really kind of an attempt to understand at a national level where things stand. So we had a section in the report on the characteristics of young people on the autism spectrum. This is kind of looking at some of their functional and adaptive behaviors. We had information about language and communication ability. And as many of you know, language and communication are really two different things. So some people on the autism spectrum may not be able to speak, but that does not mean that they are unable to communicate. And so we were able to describe this fact using the data that we had. And this is actually something that we find when we're presenting to reporters, or if I'm interacting with legislators who don't know much about autism. Many of them are surprised by this. And so it's handy for us to be able to have this kind of information to illustrate the fact that even though there may be people on the autism spectrum who cannot speak, many people who cannot speak does not mean that they cannot communicate if given the proper support and the right opportunities. We talked about sort of characterizing the other health and mental health challenges that face many people on the autism spectrum, as many of you know, but again, which is kind of a surprise to people that we interact a lot with who don't know much about autism. We need to educate people about the fact that autism rarely comes all by itself. And there are many people on the autism spectrum also have a variety of other issues that they're struggling with, ranging from health to mental health to behavioral health challenges. And we use these data to educate other people about the fact that autism is not an isolated thing that just happens all by itself, that more often than not, people on the autism spectrum are struggling with a variety of things. And what may hold people back from achieving good outcomes in adulthood may not necessarily derive directly from the fact of their autism, but oftentimes people on the spectrum are having difficulty, say, keeping or getting a job, may relate more to physical or mental health challenges that they're struggling with than their autism symptoms per se. Some other kinds of questions we can look at with these data, understanding what happened in terms of outcomes, in terms of right after leaving high school. So we have heard for families, of course, for many years, families have known the fact that when you leave special education, when your son or daughter exits high school, access to services plummets. And many people tell us it's like being pushed off a cliff. We call this the services cliff. Again, using national data, we were able to quantify this and share this with decision makers and lawmakers and agency directors to really illustrate just how big this cliff is and how dramatic and how impactful this is. So, for example, we often highlight the case of speech-language therapy, which is the most commonly accessed type of therapeutic service during the special ed years. And it's also the one that's hardest to get when people leave high school. It's very difficult to find funding for speech-language therapy. It's difficult to find speech-language pathologists who have training to work with adults on the spectrum. So again, we use this information to raise awareness among policymakers and agency directors about the challenges facing this population. We have information on the percentage of people who are on the spectrum when they leave high school, what percentage go on for some kind of post-secondary education. We find that using a couple of different sources of data, we've consistently find that about 1 out of 3 people on the autism spectrum do go to some form of post-secondary education, whether it's vo-tech school, 2-year community college, or 4-year college or university. For those who are heading towards college, Two-year colleges are the main gateway to higher education, and that's an important message for policymakers and funders to understand, because it speaks to the pivotal role that community colleges play in the life of many people on the spectrum who are able to go down a post-secondary education pathway. That we really need to strengthen community colleges in their ability to serve people with disabilities, because for most people on the spectrum who do go to college, that community colleges is kind of where the action is, and yet that's the type of college setting that probably receives the least amount of funding and the least amount of attention in the area of research on post-secondary education. In terms of employment, we found using this data that just over half of people in the first 6 years after leaving high school had some sort of job for pay. Most people who do get a job are working part-time for low wages. We also looked at a variety of things that are correlated with whether or not people get a job right after high school. And as in other research, we find that the strongest predictor of getting a job after high school is whether you had a job during high school. So consistent with other research in the field of special education, it just speaks to the fact that investing in adequate programs during high school to support the acquisition of meaningful work experiences while students are still in high school is really still probably the most impactful, highest leverage move school districts can make in terms of helping people prepare for the world of work after high school. Social isolation, is an abiding challenge for a lot of people on the spectrum throughout school as well as into young adulthood. So we find that, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1/2 of people on the spectrum have a significant degree of social isolation in the first 6 years after high school. There are a bunch of survey questions we have access to that ask about whether people had were invited to do social events with friends or saw friends during the past year, and the social isolation that people are facing is quite stark. We can also, with many of the data sources we have, we can compare how young people on the spectrum are doing after high school compared to young people with different kinds of disabilities. So for instance, we were able to look at the rate of employment in the first few years after high school for people with autism versus young people who had other disability types. And in the area of employment, it's clear that young people on the autism spectrum are struggling more than their peers with other types of disabilities from looking at this data. And so again, we use this information to educate and raise awareness among people who have control over the purse strings for public services, who are in positions to influence the kind of help and the amount of help that's available to people on the autism spectrum. I'm going to skip through a few of these. You can find information on our website. There's all these reports. In addition to doing our national indicators reports, we have a whole range of fact sheets on specific topics, ranging from healthcare to disciplinary action. We have information maps about various indicators. We do infographics that are, useful. And again, we're always striving to find new ways to present this information to the press, the media, legislators, agency directors in ways that are easy to digest and are useful to inform policy and practice. So we're in this business now. So we do these national indicators reports. We did another one in 2016. Our 2016 report focused entirely on the vocational rehabilitation system. So Voc Rehab, as many of you know, is a national system. It's administered by states, and every state has a Voc Rehab agency at the state level. And the Voc Rehab services and benefits are more often than not administered through local regional offices or local city offices. And Voc Rehab funds a variety of different types of services related to helping people to find and keep a job. The 2016 report used the national Voc Rehab data set that we've been able to use through a license with the Voc Rehab people in Washington, and with that report covered an extensive array of topics related to employment. Check that out on our website. We're in preparation right now of our 2017 report, which is just about ready to go. This year, we're focusing on a different data set and a slightly different subpopulation. We're focusing on that group of adults who are receiving services through their state developmental disability services agency. So just about every state has a state agency of some sort that's dedicated to serving people with developmental disabilities. Many of those states participate in an annual data collection effort that's called the National Core Indicators Project. And we've been able to license that access to that data, and we now have data on 31 participating states, and they have a variety of surveys, and we use this adult consumer survey to construct our current report. And it happened to include about just over 4,000 people on the autism spectrum with an average age of about 34, but ranging in age from 18 to 86. So for the first time, we're really starting now to get into doing indicators and create national statistics looking at people across the lifespan in the middle age and older. Because these are people who are qualifying for services through their state DD agency, this particular subpopulation on the spectrum tends to be more severely affected. We had almost 80% also had a co-occurring intellectual disability. About 2 out of 3 people have a co-occurring mental health condition of some sort. Most are living with a family, and about 1 out of 4 are living in a group home. Some of the topics that we'll be covering in this year's report revolve around what kind of services are people getting across the lifespan. How's that working out? What kind of help do people get? Do people have a job? What kind of jobs do people have? How much are they working? In what ways, if any, are people participating in their communities? What do we know about sort of safety and risk indicators for this population? What do we know about physical and mental health, and a couple of other topics? So we're really excited about this year's report because we're really trying to expand the range in terms of age of people that we can have something to say about. We have a growing array of topics and data sources at our disposal. We're constantly looking for new topics and new data sources. We have recently just gotten funding from the Organization for Autism Research. Many thanks to them for their generous support of our work. SSI, which is an income support program for people with disabilities, is administered through the Social Security Administration. We're in the process of doing analyses of the roles of people who get SSI. So over 130,000 people with autism get SSI income support every year. And to our knowledge, virtually no research has been done about this population. This is a huge population, a very large number of people getting help to meet their basic financial needs. This is a vulnerable population. These are usually higher needs people who have very low incomes. So this is a population that's hard to reach, and we're very excited about the reports that we're working on right now using the SSI data to describe what this population looks like, what kinds of help they're getting, what kind of help they need, and how life is turning out. We're looking at, we have more data that's just fallen into our hands now about transition to adulthood. We've got more data that's coming out next year on looking at transition services during high school. We have access to the annual college freshman survey, which includes a couple thousand people with autism from over 350 colleges and universities nationwide. So we'll be doing a report on how life is turning out for people as they enter college. And then we also are just beginning to have enough data in our hands to be able to do reports to examine whether things are getting better over time. So, we talked about this question, are we moving the needle on things like employment? Well, for the first time ever later this year, we're actually going to have repeated measures data that's going to allow us to start answering some of those questions about whether things are getting better or worse at a national level on these big topics like employment. So we're really excited about that. We work hard on this stuff. We try to make it useful to decision makers and policymakers, people who control purse strings and people who influence policy and practice. However, it's been really challenging to get this work funded. This kind of work is not your traditional sort of scientific, brains and genes and behavior kind of work in the autism arena. So it's very challenging to get this kind of indicators work funded, even though we are told that it's highly impactful. And if you're familiar with the IACC's portfolio analysis report, this is a periodic exercise that the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee does to tally how much money is being spent on autism research across federal agencies and major foundations. And their most recent report indicates that only 1% of autism funding gets spent on lifespan issues and issues about adulthood. So, we're really working hard on these topics, and we hope that funding sources will come around and eventually become more supportive of these important kinds of topics of research about how life unfolds across adulthood. Because as we know, autism does not go away in adolescence. Young children with autism grow up to be adults on the autism spectrum, and the majority of a typical lifespan is spent in adulthood, and yet adulthood is the period of life that we know the least amount about when it comes to autism. Another disturbing thing, frankly, in the news is that we have the president's budget forecast at this point is for a 20% across the board cut in NIH funding, which is quite distressing. So in an arena that's already underfunded, the prospect of further cuts to funding is quite distressing. Now let me switch gears for a minute and talk about our Transition Pathways Initiative. I'm going to go over this briefly, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers, because I know you all have lots of questions, and I'd be happy to do my best to answer some of those questions. So for many years, I've kind of been in this business of using national data to talk about the needs of this population and how documenting the fact of poor outcomes in young adulthood. So we challenge ourselves to also kind of get into the business of trying to figure out some solutions. And the Transition Pathways Initiative is a project that I worked really hard on getting conceptualized and funded here at Drexel. And we're underway when it's very exciting. So the Transition Pathways Initiative, what we're aiming to do is to create a collection of innovative and collaborative efforts to improve young adult outcomes right after high school. We come at this with a particular perspective on how to achieve community-level, systems-wide change. We're really not looking to invent new forms of therapy or direct practice. What we're really trying to do is shift at the community level how the business of transition gets done by bringing different agencies and different stakeholders together to rethink how they deliver help to this population and do it in a more coordinated, impactful, and effective manner. So for example, we launched a project search site here on our Drexel campus this past year. For those of you who don't know, Project Search is an amazing program. It's been around for about 20 years. It was invented at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and it's now been replicated hundreds of times around the world. The basic Project Search model is it's an intensive, year-long, full-time internship model for high school students with an intellectual disability who are in their last year of high school. So it's typically targeted at people who are 18 to 21. And what the Project Search people found was that analyzing their own outcomes data, that the program was not always working great for people who had an intellectual disability and also autism. So, a variety of different people at different universities began working on improving the model of Project Search so that it worked better for people with autism. And through the pioneering efforts of colleagues at New York Collaborates for Autism and UNC Teach program, Project Search is now offering an autism-specific version. It's called the Autism Augmentation Package. And so we are piloting that on our campus, and it's been working great. So we work, the unique thing about the Project Search model that we're so excited about is that it really works at this level of systems change. So it requires the collaboration of the state VR agency, the local school district, the state DD agency, and area employers. And we bring all those people together and we foster a process of collaboration so that these agencies that are all working with this population anyway are just doing so in a more coordinated fashion. And so we help braid these different funding streams together to serve these young people. And it benefits the young people who are directly participating in the program, but it also benefits people who are not directly participating in the program because it changes and improves the nature of interagency collaboration among these partners that are charged with serving this population in the first place. So what we have found is that this project search collaboration has become really kind of the foundation on which interagency collaboration among all these different organizations has improved dramatically, which benefits not only the interns who are working here on our Drexel campus, it also benefits countless others who are in special ed and receiving services through VR, the school district, and so on. So that's the kind of programming that we're really interested in launching here at Drexel, would be programming that emphasizes inter-organization collaboration using existing streams of funding in more creative and innovative and high-leverage ways. And then we're packing some research around the edges of that, trying to understand how to improve outcomes even better, because boy, do we need it. The outcomes are not great in young adulthood, and we're eager to be part of the solution and not just documenting the fact of poor outcomes. With that, I think I am going to conclude my talk and turn it back over to our moderators and ask if anybody has questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shattuck. That was a wonderful overview of all the work that you guys are doing. We do have lots of questions, so I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. I'm going to start with a couple of just clarifying questions and then dive into the bigger picture questions. So one of the participants was hoping that you could tell us what IAAC stands for.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, now we get in our alphabet soup of jargon. So IACC stands for the Interagency Autism Committee. Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee. So basically, at the federal level, as part of the Combating Autism Act and then part of the CARES Act, it's a interagency committee that has representatives from most major federal agencies. So there's a representative from the Department of Education, there's a representative from the National Institutes of Health, there's a representative from other agencies. There are also citizen members who sit on this committee, as well as scientific members. And the primary mission of the IACC is to periodically draft and update a strategic plan that articulates what the priorities are for federal funding of research on autism. So if you go to their website, you'll see that they have a strategic plan for autism research that outlines, it's kind of our nation's marching orders. It's our official statement of what the priorities are in research. And they divide it into different topical categories. So there's a topical category about what causes autism, there's a topical category, and then there's a topical category about research relating to life in adulthood. So then the other thing that the IACC does periodically is they do these reports where they comb through all the records of all the research that's been funded on autism, either from federal sources like NIH or the CDC, but they also look at major funders like the Simons Foundation and Autism Speaks. They tally all that information on how much money gets spent on research about autism, and then they divide that topically into these major topics by which the strategic plan is organized. And so then they're able to make statements about, well, if 200, 300 million, whatever hundreds of millions of dollars were spent last year or a few years ago on autism research, what percentage was spent on each topical category. So in their most recent report, what I was referring to is they call it their portfolio analysis. They found that 1% of all autism research funding was devoted to these lifespan issues around topics related to adulthood. 1%.
Okay, great. Yep, thank you for that clarification. So another clarifying question that someone had was about the SSI beneficiaries. I think you had a slide that showed some of the statistics about this. I wanted to better understand what that slide was showing and what the SSI means and what the statistic was sort of speaking to.
Let's see. Oops, I think I blew by it there. Okay, so so SSI. So, yeah, sorry I wasn't more clear about that. So basically what I was trying to do was to describe the breadth of topics that we're trying to address with our indicators reports and the indicators work we do at the National Autism Data Center. What I was trying to refer to was that we are working on some reports that use data from the Social Security Administration to describe the population of people who do get income support through the SSI program. So this is a large, many billions of dollars get spent each year on SSI. Approximately, I think it's about 140,000 people on the autism spectrum receive income support through the SSI program. And yet to date, it's a population that really has not been described in research, and it's a population that we don't know much about, even though it's a major player in the lives of adults on the autism spectrum. And from a policy perspective, it's a subpopulation of people that we just really don't know much about. So we're trying to shine some light on that and increase our understanding about the population of people who get SSI income support from the Social Security Administration who are on the autism spectrum.
Okay, perfect. Yep, thank you. There are also a group of questions that I think are sort of speaking to some of the different groups within the autism spectrum disorders. Of course, there are different levels of functioning. There are also, gender sorts of issues, males and females. And I think people were wondering, within the reports itself, do you break out the information by any of those, say, functioning levels, or by gender, or race, any other sorts of breakouts that you may do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's something we struggle with a lot. So again, to clarify, so we most of the work that we're doing at the data center rely on using data that was collected by other people. So data that was collected by service systems like VR and SSI, data that was collected through a national health survey or national education survey. So in some sense, we're kind of always at the mercy of who collected the data and what they thought was valuable. And unfortunately, a lot of the data that we have to work with don't come with a consistent or even any manner by which we can create those kind of subgroups based on things like severity. So we kind of go with whatever we have. So in each report, we do our best to drill down and break out our indicators by whatever kinds of categories that are available in that given data set. And it's not always very satisfying. Frankly, it's quite frustrating sometimes because we want to be able to answer those sorts of questions because we have those questions too. And yet our ability, our hands are a bit tied in our ability to answer those kinds of questions because those are not always options available to us in the data that we get. I will say, though, that this is a topic that I'm quite passionate about, and we not through the indicators work or the data center, but we do have another project on the drawing board that we're trying to put together. So the question that I get asked probably the most by legislators and journalists, so people who may not know much about autism, but if they're doing a story or if they're trying to respond to constituents and they're trying to become educated about this issue of transition or even just about adulthood, the question I get asked the most is, so, you say, Dr. Shattuck, you're telling me that there's all these adults or there are all these young adults on the autism spectrum. So help me understand. So you've said that the spectrum, that some people are more severely affected than others. So break that down for me. Like what percentage of people are going to go to college and have friends and maybe get married, and what percentage of people are we talking about who may need lifelong supports of some sort at a very intensive level? And frankly, as a field, we can't answer that question right now using population-based data. We have no good answer for that question, which I find really frustrating. So we're trying to think through that puzzle of like, well, how would we collect that data so that we can characterize at a population level, at a national level? Well, yeah, it's a good question. Like, how do we understand the autism spectrum in a meaningful way that can actually inform policy and practice and funding decisions? What would those categories even be, and how do we gather data to say, well, X% of people are going to need this kind of support, X% of people are going to need less support. Because I think from a policy perspective and a public awareness perspective, those are reasonable questions, and we want to be able to engage with lawmakers and decision makers on those questions that they always have on their mind. So we feel some sense of frustration with the limitations of these existing data sources and their inability to answer those kinds of questions.
Does that carry over to the state level as well? There was one question about if all the states were represented and whether or not there were things that could be done to encourage states to contribute or gather data.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the state level, boy, that's a whole other can of worms. So in last year's VR report, using the VR data, we began looking at state variability. And so if you look at the 2016 report on voc rehab, well, we have all these data indicators on what percentage of people who qualify for services actually end up getting services, and what percentage of people, what kinds of services do people end up getting once they qualify. Among all the people who end up getting some services through VR, what percentage of those people actually end up getting a job? These are all questions that we looked at using all the data, and then we broke it out by state. And I've done state level policy work before. I've consulted with state agencies on their Medicaid programs. I know the fact is that where you live matters, and business gets done differently from state to state, and we have some degree of variation across states in terms of the kinds of policies they have related to developmental disabilities and funding and so forth. But we were not at all prepared for the magnitude of just how big the differences are across states. So that prompted us to put together another funding proposal, which just got funded. And we're just beginning to dig into this issue, particularly with the voc rehab data. We're trying to understand why do the outcomes and the access to services vary so hugely across states. So the issue, I think, with a lot of public policy programs, public programs, there is a kind of an elephant in the living room. The fact is, like, where you live matters, and which state you live in matters, and it influences pretty dramatically the kind of help people can access. Do we know
why? Yes, I think you're basically answering the next question, which is whether or not things like wait lists are longer on a per state basis, or whether or not adults in a certain state may have different access to funding. It sounds like you're saying the answer is yes.
The answer is definitely yes. Well, some states don't even keep waiting lists because they don't want to. It's embarrassing. They want to have a wait list, so they refuse to keep them or report them. So it's just things vary hugely from state to state. And we're developing a series of research projects that are trying to sort of crack into that and look at, document basically how different states do business differently in terms when it comes to serving adults with autism and other developmental disabilities. What are states doing? And frankly, part of that is just it's tedious cataloging. We're literally going state by state and trying to catalog all the different programs, services, laws, and so forth that each state has related to autism, the different initiatives that they've got underway, and it's somewhat tedious work, but I think it's important because it's going to help shed light on understanding why things vary. And ultimately, our hope, and this is our long-term hope, is that we can identify. In clinical practice, there's a lot of talk about best practices and evidence-based practice. I would love to elevate our discussion about policy to that same level, where we can talk about evidence-based policy and best practices from a policy standpoint based on research where we know that in states that do X, outcomes are better. So that's the kind of endpoint that we want to reach with our research about state variability.
Absolutely, and I think Chad agrees with you. All of the participants right now in the chat, I'm seeing just a lot of interest in this particular topic and a lot of agreement with you on the importance of state-by-state data. It sounds like that some of this is in progress for you right now, but is there a place that they can view any of your state-by-state data, or are you saying you guys are actively working on that right now?
In the 2016 indicators report on VR, we had some breakout by state.
Okay, so they can go to the website and take a look at that. Yep, and then more will be forthcoming. Okay, exactly, a lot of questions about that in chat. Okay, perfect. All right, thank you. So I think there are some other issues as well that people are interested in that are sort of more specific, and there's been some interest in the employment statistics that you quoted, and in particular, the rate of employment. A few people have commented seems actually pretty high for the U.S. I think we must have someone on here from the U.K. who said the figure is quite a bit lower, and they're wondering how you actually calculated the statistics for who was considered employed and if there were different levels. I think you had a slide on that.
Yeah, I'm backing up here. As I'm backing up on the slides on my control screen, is that showing up?
Yeah, yep, we can see it as well.
Right. So we've got here we go. Oops, shot by it. Yeah. So I think we're talking about this slide here. So again, we have different sources of data that we turn to for these statistics, and honestly, I hear. I'm at the crossroads of this stuff, so I hear all these different reports and estimates, and people say, oh, the unemployment rate is 99%. I hear so many different statistics, and when I ask, well, where did that data come from? Most people can't answer it. We can answer it, and I'm not saying that in a vain or prideful way. I'm just saying that, and is this accurate at the level of all adults? No. So this particular slide is based on information from the National Longitudinal Transition Study. That was a $21 million national study that was funded by the Department of Education and conducted by a company called SRI International. The study ran from 2001 to 2009. And the way the study worked was they began with a nationally representative sample of school districts, and then within each of those school districts they randomly sampled the rosters of high school students who were receiving special ed and invited those students and their families to participate in this study. So they had over 11,000 high school students in special ed at the beginning of the study in 2001. And it wasn't designed as an autism study per se, but it just happened to include nearly 1,000 high school students with autism at the beginning of the study. So that study, because it was framed as a study of high school students in special ed, the sampling revolved around the special ed category of autism. So what that data doesn't include, that data did not include people who were homeschooled. It did not include people who who may have been in high school but maybe didn't need special ed services. And then the way the study operated was they recontacted these families every couple of years to continue checking in and gathering more data. And then that went on until these young people were in their mid-20s. So this particular slide is based on adding up all the data we had from the first, what life looked like in the first 6 years after people leave high school. And this is basically the cumulative employment rate during the first 6 years after exiting high school among young people who were in the special ed category of autism. So I know that's a long way of answering that question, but I wanted to be precise and give that question proper consideration. So
yeah,
that's a very specific. That's so the tricky thing is there is no national registry of people with autism, and there's no single source of data that we can point to that's going to give us a God's eye perspective of what's the true unemployment rate for all adults with autism. I mean, if somebody has that data, oh my gosh, please call me because I would love to know where that data is. I'm not aware of where that data might exist. So we're kind of at the mercy of the different data sets that we have access to, and that is the employment rate that we saw in this particular data set. And I would say that's just coincidentally, it lines up pretty neatly with the VR report. So in the VR data, I don't have a slide on it here, but if you look at our report, among people who qualified for and got services through VR, about 60% of them exit VR with a job. So, again, most of those people are working part-time at low wages, so it's not a great job necessarily. And they may not keep the job because VR doesn't really track how long people keep a job for, but that is the sort of the placement rate of people exiting VR who are on the spectrum.
Okay, yep. Thank you so much for that clarification. We have about 5 minutes left. I want to try, if we can, to get to at least 2 more questions. One of them, we've actually had several people ask a varying level of questions about college for individuals with ASD. I know you showed a slide, too, that addressed specifically community college, and you spoke a bit about that. I think people are wondering if your statistics give you any other feedback that you can share about particular things that can help individuals with ASD succeed, or if there are certain resources or anything really you can speak to regarding college that your statistics may have above and beyond what you already spoke to. I'm just getting a lot of questions about this one topic.
Really, gosh, yeah. I'm struggling because my memory is not as strong as it used to be. So I beyond the slide that's in front of me here, I can't off the top of my head just whip out more statistics. But I can tell you sort of my impressions from being immersed in this data. A few other things I would add to kind of elaborate a bit. First of all, we did write a paper a couple of years ago now using the same data set where we looked at the survey questions of where they asked questions of people who were in college. And there was a whole set of questions in there about what's called disclosure. So if you have a young person with any kind of disability who goes to college, there are a lot of different things in the college setting. One of which is if you want to apply, if you want help from the Disability Services Office at most colleges, you have to initiate that process. You have to ask for help, and you have to prove that you need help through a determination process. And so there's this. It's an intentional act whereby you have to disclose the fact that you have a disability and explain that to someone and prove it, basically, in order to qualify for help. So we found, using the survey data, that approximately 1/3 of college students on the spectrum had chosen not to do that. They didn't want to out themselves, basically, as being a person with a disability. And it just reminds us of the fact that young people with autism are young people, and they're struggling to find their way in the world. They're struggling through all these issues of identity formation and finding their voice that all young people struggle with. So it's a tricky balancing act for families because they want their son or daughter to be getting all the help they can get. At the same time, their son or daughter may now be an adult, and they've got their own choices to make about how they live their life, which may not always be in sync with what mom and dad want. And it's a really tough. I've seen a lot of families struggle with this, where they really want their son or daughter to disclose the fact of their disability and ask for help on campus, but the son or daughter is just not there, and they don't want to do that because they're afraid of the stigma, they don't want to be different, and so on. And that's a little bit at odds. In the world of autism, we also have a lot of young people who are very out with their autism and very vocal as self-advocates, and that's terrific. But we also have to realize that that's not the choice everyone makes. We need to find ways, through our discourse on these issues, to create safe spaces and supportive environments for people, whether they disclose or not.
Yeah, I think that's an important point as well. So just a really quick, very last question, because I know you need to run. We had a few questions about how folks can actually support the type of work that you do, whether fundraising or advocating for issues they see as important, or helping identify awareness gaps they see. Anything that you can say in terms of advocacy for how they can support the type of work that you do.
Oh yeah, gosh. Well, we're constantly fundraising. Like any researcher, I never say no to a potential donor. So you can always contact me if you'd like to talk about supporting the work of the Autism Institute. I'd be glad to chat with you. We're really fortunate. We collaborate with a lot of different disability groups, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, the AWN, Autism Speaks, OAR, you can as families, a lot of the foundations like Autism Speaks and OAR that raise money for research listen to families, and you can influence funding priorities and research at those foundations by writing letters, talking to your local representatives. Then the national agenda, the IACC almost always has public comment periods when they're setting their priorities, or you can write comments to them. So I really encourage people to get involved. The only reason we're having this conversation today is because families are passionate, and they put autism on the map as a political and health issue. And so families have a lot of influence, and they can really, by raising their voices, they can definitely make a difference in these issues of agendas and priorities.
I think that's a great point to end on, and I so appreciate your time. We're at the top of the hour, so I think we're going to wrap up here. Thank you again, Dr. Shattuck.